What's up, everyone? Welcome back to C&D Sports. Today we have part one of our NHL Season Preview. Season's just around the corner, so today Dan, as our resident hockey expert here, he's going to get you set. I'm going to chime in where I see fit here. He's got his power rankings for the year, and then he's also going to break down the divisional standings of where he thinks teams will finish in their division. So this will be part one. Part two will be coming soon.
Yes, and let's get right into it. We're going to go from 32 to 1.
Yeah.
And that's for this video. We'll talk about the divisions. Next video will be more awards, playoffs, and just some headlines going into the 2021-2022 season.
Yeah.
But rounding it out at 32, I have the Arizona Coyotes.
Makes sense.
Which I think they've sold off anybody of value right now. I mean, they may trade away Kessel too later on after retaining some cap. Then there's really nothing there outside of Clayton Keller and Jacob Chikrin.
Right.
And they easily have the worst goaltending tandem in the NHL. There's nothing going on here except for they're just waiting for all the cap space to clear from the Vancouver deals, which would have cleared for Vancouver had they not gone for Ekman-Larsson. They have a lot of cap space going into 2022.
And they're just waiting to use that mess of draft picks that they acquired this offseason.
Yeah, so it's really the future to look forward to.
It's a true
in Arizona.
rebuild. We haven't seen a true rebuild in a while, and Arizona's embracing that.
Yeah, Buffalo, another team embracing that, who I have at 31. I would have had them at 32, but the only reason is teams generally don't finish dead last in back-to-back seasons. So obviously without Eichel, Ristolainen, and Reinhart, they should be a worse team. But when you move disgruntled players, you generally have young guys and players that are on your roster step up. And that's what Buffalo's looking for anyways.
They'll get more, I think they'll get more chemistry than they did last year.
Yeah, and I think with or without Eichel, on paper, Buffalo has the better team defensively, goaltending-wise. Forwards, it's kind of a saw-off, but we'll see how it plays out there. At 30, I have Detroit. And it's been tough news. First off, they're going to be missing Tyler Bertuzzi, who is unvaccinated.
Yeah.
So that just means he won't be able to play games in Canada as of now. I'm not sure if that will change. So
you might not be able to play games in New York as well, because I know a lot of stadiums in New York have a vaccinated player rule. So
okay,
it'll be it's 9 games for sure in Canada, but it'll be interesting to see if that spreads to more American cities as well.
Yeah, and today as we film on Thursday, Jakob Vrana is out for 4 months, so that's a huge hit to scoring. But I still think it's the future you're going to look towards in Detroit. And one thing to watch is, despite these losses up front, their defense is very stable for a rebuilder.
Right.
Like in terms of bad teams, they easily have the best defense in the NHL. They have Ned and Grice. I think that's a solid tandem. Mm-hmm. So it's going to be interesting, but I still think it's near the bottom for Detroit. Columbus, another team like Arizona who just sold off with guys like Jones and not bringing vets back. I think they have interesting options when you look at guys like Max Domi, Zach Werenski's still there, and their goaltending tandem's still pretty solid in Merzlikins and Korpisalo.
Still running with Patrick Laine too.
Yeah, Laine's looking to improve, so...
And I think, an interesting storyline, and I know this isn't the storyline video, but it'll be interesting to see what the Blue Jackets do now post-Tortorella.
Yeah.
So it's Tortorella... He himself brings his own culture to a team, and now it's going to be a complete culture shift because no one's like Torts.
Yeah, it's for the most part a true rebuild. They still have some core pieces, but I think they're looking towards the future in Columbus. Now, Anaheim is another team I have missing, and I have them at 28. And the reason being is I want them to improve, but their forwards... The group there is just so thin.
Right.
No, like, it's really tough when you consider the fact that Max Comtois is your top scorer. They need a lot out of Zegras for improvement, and Drysdale on the point to bring that offense from the blue line.
Absolutely.
But what they do have going for them is a great top four. You have Cam Fowler still, Josh Manson, Drysdale, as we mentioned, Kevin Shattenkirk, and Hampus Lindholm, with John Gibson in the back. I think that's great as long as they can stay healthy.
Yeah.
But it's not enough for them to improve much. And San Jose at 27, I don't know why they're running it back. I think they have to commit to a rebuild, no matter how you slice and dice it, because they can't do it with the team they have, right? They can't be competitive. They have no depth.
Can't.
They have no defense. They have no goaltending. They just have a lot of overpaid players. And I think the headline for this team this season is, what are they going to do with Thomas Hertl and Evander Kane?
Yeah.
And that leads to probably having to move Timo Meier if it does become a rebuild, because those are, at least Hertl and Meier, your only guys with value, and Kane is just...
Kane has no value because there's a new investigation on him every single week. At this point, Kane is just that type of guy that I don't really see a fit for him in the league based on his off-ice conduct.
It's a Tony DeAngelo thing where he may have to take some time off and regroup, and then maybe he can join San Jose. But for him to go from an off-season of allegations right into playing, I don't know how it's going to work. The only thing I'm excited for is to see William Eklund, whether or not he plays this season. He's been good in the preseason. Again, I think San Jose's got to look towards the future. But at 26, I have the LA Kings, and this is where I think we're going to have teams that can start pushing into the playoffs. Any team I listed before, I don't think has a shot. If they make it, then my bad, I guess.
Yeah.
But the LA Kings are my first dark horse because despite defensing and goaltending looking suspect, I think their forward group is very interesting. They have options and they have depth.
Yep.
And I think they've improved well with guys like Victor Arvidsson, who looks like he can pot 30, 40 goals, maybe even 50 in the right situation because he has that talent.
Right.
By no means, and am I saying he's a 50 goal scorer, because that's kind of outrageous, but he has that talent, and if there's the right fit, they have a lot of young guys stepping up that can help him accomplish that. And then you have Philippe Danault, who can be that center behind Kopitar to shut things down and help stabilize, so Kopitar doesn't have to take on that defensive load, and he can, at an older age, embrace his scoring game.
Right.
So it's going to be an interesting season for LA. I think it's only going up from here for them because they've built well and they're still young outside of Doughty, Brown, and Kopitar, but it doesn't hurt to have vets. Look at the San Francisco Giants.
Exactly. Go check out that video.
Then I have Ottawa, and I think they've been developing the same as the LA Kings. What is good for them is they haven't completely defined their culture. Like, they're obviously a hardworking team.
Yeah.
But they haven't spent the money and kind of locked themselves into a character as a team that restricts them from continuing to build. So as they build, there's a lot of freedom and a lot of options, so they can be the team they want to be and play good hockey. And I think as they continue to develop, their talent is going to reach their level of hard work,
right,
which makes them a threat. I originally had them pushing higher into the playoff race, but I had to drop them because I don't trust their goaltending yet.
Exactly.
Matt Murray isn't stable, and Philip Gustafsson is kind of...
It's their biggest
young.
question mark.
So, and of course, defense, it's kind of like LA where they have options, but it's a matter of whether or not they perform.
Right.
So we'll see in Ottawa what they're able to do. Above them, I have the Nashville Predators. And I think at this point, after trading Ryan Ellis, you don't make that deal unless you're going towards a rebuild, because they said last season our untouchables are Pekka Rinne, Roman Josi, and Ryan Ellis, right? So after Rinne retires and Ellis is dealt, I think they're going towards, at the very least, a retool, which isn't hopeful in terms of them making the playoffs.
No.
I don't think it's a possibility at this point, and they've lost a lot over the years on the blue line. They've lost Jones, they've lost Weber, who they replaced with Subban, but he's gone, and now Ellis. I don't know how they're going to replace him. Now they have Fabro, they have Philippe Meier, and young guys, but I mean, they can do it because they're Nashville, but I don't know if they will. And forwards, again, it's another year where it's questionable. So I don't have too much hope for Nashville. Now I have...
Good pickup to get Cody Glass, though.
Yes, that is a good player with a lot of potential, and we'll see. They do have some young prospects. So at 23, I have my first hot take with Pittsburgh missing the playoffs.
It is a hot take.
It is a hot take, and talent-wise, I'm wrong to have him this low, but I think it's going to be an injury issue. In years past, they were able to eat injuries to Crosby and Malkin, even if it happened at the same time, but they traded out Jared McCann. That means they're going to have to go between Jeff Carter and maybe even Teddy Bluger to be their first line center, especially to start the season. Crosby's out and Malkin's out for the first 2 months. He probably won't be back until December. So that's where I have them out. They can eat injuries to Chris Letang. I think that's fine, but I think it's the forward group that's very suspect, and they didn't improve on goalie. So that's where I take issue with Pittsburgh's offseason. I think they needed to add. I don't think they could afford any losses, and that's what they did this offseason.
You mentioned losses, and you mentioned Jared McCann, and another one that they lost is Brandon Tanev to the Seattle expansion, and Tanev isn't a guy that necessarily puts up numbers per se, but he is a guy that does a lot of things off the stat sheet, and definitely one of those glue guys that really makes the losses of Malkin. And in this case, Malkin was out last year. Crosby wasn't out last year, but he would make having Crosby out and even having guys like Letang out, it just makes it a lot easier up front. And that, like you said, it's something they don't have up front anymore. I think Pittsburgh is one of those teams that we've picked them for a few years now to digress, and they just haven't.
Yeah.
So, again, I think this is low. Your reasoning makes sense that if it's an injury-riddled season, I can't argue with an injury-riddled season.
Yeah.
If Crosby's going to be out long-term, if
yeah.
Malkin's going to be out long-term, could be an issue. But like you said, if they are healthy, they will shoot up. And if they are healthy, I see no reason why they can't make the playoffs.
And just another note, this is my batch of teams that I think are going to be pushing for playoff spots.
Yeah.
So even with injuries, I have faith in Pittsburgh. It's just not enough to have them above other teams who I felt in the Metro especially, you're going to see every team outside of Washington has improved. And that's where it's going to be tough for teams like Washington and Pittsburgh who are getting older. And ahead of them, I have the New Jersey Devils, who I think are heading in the right direction. It's another offseason where they made a lot of moves. You saw a couple off seasons ago, they bring in PK Subban and a few other pieces, but it just didn't work because although they brought in the big names, it didn't click. You may run into that situation again because defensively they're still weak. But they helped that out by bringing in Bernier to back up Blackwood. So you have a great tandem there. Bernier may even steal some starts. But defensively, you want a little more complementary pieces to put beside guys like Dougie Hamilton, who could use some support so they can be explosive offensively. Their forward group is young, and again, another area where they're improving. So I think it's only going to go up for New Jersey. Again, not enough for me to give them a surefire playoff spot, but enough for me to put them over Pittsburgh for now.
Yeah.
Above them, I have the Minnesota Wild, and I think it's going to be a tough season losing Ryan Suter. They were able to bring back Kaprizov. Their defense is suspect, though. Their forward group's young, and that's another area where it's deep, but it could be better. And goaltending's looking solid with Capo Kakinen and Cam Talbot. But on the blue line, I'm not sure they'll be able to eat that loss. Now, you also lose Susie alongside Suter.
Yeah.
So you try and replace them in numbers, bringing in Kulikov, Goligoski. Maybe you get some improvement from Kalen Addison. And Jordy Ben and John Merrill at this point are 7 defensemen. So I'm not sure how it's going to pair and how things are going to flow with your big three in Spurgeon, Brodin, and Dumba. I think it's just a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what direction they're headed in. Now, I have Calgary still outside of the playoffs, and they didn't really improve this offseason. Yeah, you bring in Blake Coleman, but you lose Mark Giordano.
Right.
And that doesn't do it for me. So what Calgary needs to make the playoffs is improvement as a group. But I don't know how you get that with probably one of the best captains your team has ever had.
It's tough. I think Calgary has always been the term culture change has always been used, and I don't think this was what anyone should have had in mind for a culture change. You know, people throw the name Gaudreau, Monahan, that maybe it's that duo up front that's not working. I don't think anyone put any sort of blame on Giordano. And I get it's the expansion draft, but it was one of those things where he definitely shouldn't have been the first guy to go when it comes to switching up culture. So
it's a big loss. Yes, I get he's older and you want to look towards the future, but for this season, when you're seeking improvement, you're not going to get it in Calgary. Right. My only hope for them is Markstrom. And let's say they trade Monahan. Who's their captain going to be? Backlund? Right? I think there may be a lack of leadership in that locker room as well. So I'm not sure what to look forward to in Calgary. I can't have them too high, despite how talented of a team they are.
Right.
I think they've lost too much. Now, I have Seattle here, and you can just go watch our season preview if you want to see what I think of them. But to sum it up, I think they're solid on all fronts. I don't think there's necessarily a weakness outside of top-end talent.
No.
But they have good structure, and they have a great tandem in Drieger and Grubauer. So I have them here, and they're definitely going to be pushing the playoffs. You would expect and hope, especially with them, I think, being better than Vegas was in their inaugural season, at least on paper.
Right.
So we'll see what Seattle does, but
worse teams have made the playoffs than the Seattle Kraken. So
yep, 100%. This is where I have the Montreal Canadiens. Despite losing Weber and Dano, I think they had a good offseason bringing in Hoffman. They're getting Drouin back with improvement from Caulfield and Suzuki, who are still young. And even if they maintain the level of play they were showing in the playoffs, it's a great pairing, a great young duo you have there. It's a matter of what Carey Price is up to, but Jake Allen's been a great backup for him, so the pressure isn't as high as it's been in years past. I don't see playoffs for them, but I see a competitive season because it is a big loss losing Weber and Philippe Dano. So this is where I have Vancouver, and this is kind of banking on Thatcher Demko having a season that fits the player he is, because he is one guy we both overlooked on our top 10 goalies, because talent-wise, he's up there. He's one of the better goaltenders in the NHL. And
right.
This is the best backup he's had since becoming a starter in Yaroslav Halak, a guy who's got some fire under his belly after being a fourth string goalie in Boston, right? Halak wants to play. He wants to back up this young man and help him develop his game.
Yep.
He wants to be on a competitive team. And if Vancouver obviously brings back Pettersson and Hughes, I think with their explosive and top-end talent, they have the ability to. Of course, they often tend to disappoint, but they bring in Oliver Ekman-Larsson, who may not be who he used to be, but he can be a role player, maybe a little too highly paid of a role player, but he can help out and take some pressure off of Quinn Hughes. And if he starts the season without him, we may see some numbers we haven't seen from him, because there are always talks of Ekman-Larsson being a Norris defenseman in Arizona.
Right.
It just never came into fruition because of the defensive structure they play. So he never got to put up the points his talent would have gotten him otherwise.
The issue that I have with Vancouver is, you said it before, this is a team that normally disappoints. And that's the biggest thing. This team on paper has been a playoff team for a couple of seasons now, and yet they've still yet to make the playoffs for a number of years now.
Now,
I think this is a good spot for them, because I think every year they're going to be a playoff contender. I don't see them making the leap. Like you had Calgary and Seattle lower. I think Vancouver I think at least Seattle for sure. And I'd opt Calgary might be in a better place than Vancouver right now, in my opinion, just knowing how much Vancouver disappoints year in and year out.
Yeah.
They're a team that, they've got a good fan base, so it's always good when they are good and they're in the playoffs. It makes it more exciting when there's more Canadian teams in the mix. But I don't think this is the year. I was excited to see them have all this cap space next year, and then they occupied it with
Connor
Garland and Oliver Ekman-Larsson. And they're not bad moves by any means.
Garland's a huge addition on their forward group. And another thing I want to mention is COVID took them out.
That is true.
The reality is Vancouver is a stronger team than they were last season. 2 seasons ago, obviously they went through some changes, losing Markstrom among others like Edler and so on. But 2 seasons ago, this team was giving Vegas some trouble.
Yeah, it's a fair point. I want to see them look as good as they do on paper, but I'm not going to make. I wouldn't make that prediction. Yep. Obviously, these
my final point is I think that third spot in the Pacific's wide open.
It is true. The Pacific is probably the most wide open division in all of hockey. So the opportunity's there for them.
This isn't really a testament to how good I think Vancouver is, because I have them tightly packed with Seattle, Calgary, and others that are lower. I think this is more that third spot's wide open.
Yeah.
And that's how I view it, right? Because at the end of the day, someone's got to take it. It's a matter of who. And for now, I'm taking Vancouver. That's the team I have the most faith in. But
Fair
Seattle
enough.
could pull up. And I don't want to overhype Seattle yet, because Vegas did something that you can't expect from every expansion team.
No.
They definitely raised the bar.
Yeah.
But we'll see. Above them, I have the Chicago Blackhawks getting the first wildcard spot in the West. And they've improved this offseason. Obviously, Seth Jones comes in. He should be a number 1 defenseman. You would think he will be now that he doesn't have to compete with Werenski.
Mm-hmm.
And you bring in Jake McCabe for that support on the blue line. They still have Calvin DeHaan and Connor Murphy. I think that's a solid top 4. You probably want something stronger, but their forward group's deadly.
Right.
You have Kane, you have DeBrincat, you have Doc, who's going to be healthy, Taves, who's going to be healthy. Maybe Strome improves. Whether or not he does, Kubalik's there. And this team, without Taves, without Doc, and without the offseason improvements they've had, they were pushing for the playoffs.
Yeah.
In a tough division alongside Carolina, teams like Tampa Bay and Florida, they were still in the mix. So I think it's going to be a good season for them. And then you have Marc-Andre Fleury. Whether or not he shows up, Kevin Lankinen's a starter.
Right.
So if Fleury isn't what he was in Vegas, that's probably the best backup in the NHL.
Oh, for sure.
If he is, then you have an elite goalie alongside an excellent starter. It's just like the tandem he had in Vegas with Robin Lehner as his backup.
Exactly. I was just about to say that.
So I think it's definitely going to be a season of improvement for Chicago. A lot to look forward to as a Chicago fans. I'm excited. So this is where I have the New York Rangers, and like Vancouver, they've been developing for quite some time. They just hadn't made the playoffs. They had that play-in series, but obviously losing to Carolina, they didn't technically make the playoffs. I think they have to.
Yeah, I'm hoping this is the year for them.
I think it's a prove-it season now at this spot. I technically have them out of the playoffs, as I don't have them with a wild card spot, and they're not top 3 in the Metro. So my hope for them is that they take a spot from any team above that falters, at least that I have. The question for me is whether or not Georgiev's comfortable, or if he has any desire to be a backup, because I don't think he does at this point. He's a talented goalie, and I think he's better than a backup position. I think he's a clear number 1, but when you have Shesterkin, there's only so much you can do. So we'll see how that plays off, whether they deal him or not. But maybe they make that move and that helps them out on defense or something.
Yeah,
we'll see. I think they can work something out. This is where I have Boston, and this is my first playoff team for the East. Despite losing Krejci, I think they're able to eat that loss, bringing in guys like Nick Foligno and Eric Halla.
They had one of the best off seasons, in my opinion. They brought in a ton of guys that can fill that bottom 6 and even push into that top 6 if they wanted to as well.
You have to bank on a Bergeron injury.
Right.
Krejci's been the guy to fill in there for the most part, but I think the talent they brought in is good enough.
Yeah.
Defensively, once they can work around McAvoy, I think it's going to work. In goaltending, for now, you have Linus Ullmark and Swayman.
Yep.
Fantastic tandem. Let's just say Tuukka Rask comes back. Then you have Rask and Ullmark. I think this team will be pushing for number 1 and probably another President's Trophy.
Yeah.
But I have to have them here for now because it is questionable what they're bringing in. Yes, they made great moves, but that doesn't always mean it's going to click.
Yeah, we haven't seen them play without Krejci or Rask in some time now. And, as the season approaches, that's what they're going to start the season with at least. And Krejci for the entire season, Rask, like you said, he may come back, he may not. We don't know yet. But they have to prepare to not have them at all this season. And, yeah, it's a fair spot to put them.
Yep. So this is where I have Dallas, and I think it's going to be a season of improvement for them. The injury bug hit them hard. Goaltending is really the only issue I have here.
Right.
Where you have Khudobin and Holtby, but this is the best defense Holtby will ever be playing with, right? He had good defensemen in John Carlson in Washington, but defensively, Washington and Vancouver are nowhere near talented as Dallas. So you have that a mix with the deep forward core Dallas has, and Tyler Seguin's coming back 100% healthy, which means you may have a top 10, top 20 center.
Right.
And I think that leads to Dallas being very deadly. Overall, they have a lot of options, a lot of talent. Then you factor in the Ryan Suter pickup. I think he's going to be fired up after being bought out by Minnesota when I don't think he should have been. So he signs another big contract, takes him to 39, I think. But I think he's going to do some great work in Dallas. I think Dallas is going to be deadly this year.
Right.
This is where I have the New York Islanders, and it's really just for Barry Trotz, Lou Lamoriello reasons. They have a great tandem in Sorokin and Varlamov. They're solid at every position. They lost Nick Leddy, and that is a loss.
Yeah.
But I think because it's the Islanders and they play with such a great structure, they'll make it work with anybody. They still have talent in guys like Dobson and Matthew Barzal, still waiting for Wahlstrom to pull up. So they still have guys that can rise in and make them a better team.
Exactly.
I think it's only going up for them, and this team is back-to-back conference finalist.
Yeah.
They haven't won, but as teams like Tampa Bay have declined after their offseason, the Islanders haven't.
Yeah.
Above them, I have the Edmonton Oilers. They've had some improvements and some setbacks. An improvement is bringing in guys like Warren Fogle and obviously Zach Hyman, who I think help out their winger situation. If Hyman can pair well with McDavid, get to the dirty areas, if he can keep up, I don't think it's far-fetched for him to get 40 goals.
No.
That may sound ridiculous. He has the talent. He has the hard work. And I think that combination alongside a guy like McDavid, I think it's going to be a deadly pairing.
Right.
Now, Adam Larson's a huge loss. Duncan Keith,
massive loss,
who isn't returning until October 1st because he was late to get the COVID shot. Side note. And Cody Ceci don't replace Adam Larson.
No.
So what they need is Bouchard to step up. But defensively, nobody they have in Edmonton's going to replace him. So
And they're missing Clefbaum for what looks to be another season.
Yeah, so they don't have any hope there. And goaltending's still suspect, right? You have Smith and you have, I was going to call him Khudobin. Koskinen.
Yeah.
See, so irrelevant, I forgot his name. You have Smith and you have Koskinen, and it's just good enough, but
Smith had a good year last year, but Smith's also very old. So
yeah. So it's only 1 year later, as Smith said, he's only 1 year older. So he's confident in his abilities. I'm just not confident in his backup. I think it's fine that you keep Mike Smith.
Yep.
But to pair him with Koskinen, it's very risky, right? It doesn't mean it won't work. It's just a very risky situation they have in net. And that's where I take issue. Mm-hmm. That's why I don't have them as a surefire playoff team, which means there may be 2 spots open in the Pacific.
Yeah.
Philadelphia is who I have above them, and I think like Dallas, they're a good all-around team. Their only flaw right now is Carter Hart's backup in Martin Jones. Obviously, you want some improvement, and Martin Jones has been playing for one of the worst teams in hockey, one of the least defensive-minded teams in San Jose. I think Martin Jones may be able to step it up, but I don't know if I want to put that faith in him as a backup for a team that you
I
want
certainly wouldn't.
for a team that you want going deep in the playoffs, because around their goaltending, they have a fantastic top four. You bring in Risto, you bring in Ellis, two great defensemen. Then you still have Provorov and you still have Travis Sanheim. I think their top four is great, along with their forward core. People forget about Sean Couturier. He's a season off of winning the Selke. You still have Giroux. You bring in Atkinson, who's cheaper than Voracek. I don't know whether or not you can say he's better. He can be more explosive, but he is aging.
Yep.
So they have a good mix of vets and young guys. I'm not sure that I don't think they're quite a surefire playoff team, because they're another team that disappoints often, but they've brought in the assets to look scary on paper. This is where I have Washington, and despite them aging, they're still good and they're still deadly at every position. Why I didn't have them drop off like Pittsburgh is they don't get hit with the injury bug like Pittsburgh does. And if they do, they have a better system and they have better depth.
Right.
Despite this team being built around Ovi, who is in the decline, I still think it works because you have options in Backstrom and Carlson. You have Daniel Sprong, who's stepped up. TJ Oshie's still there. Tom Wilson, say what you say, he's still there. And then Kuznetsov's a dark horse. If he bounces back, great. Washington can go deep these playoffs. Even if he doesn't, I still think they should be in the playoff mix. But I take age into account, and that's why I have them as the final team that's not surefire in the playoffs.
Right.
But kicking off the list of teams that I think without a doubt have to make the playoffs and will make the playoffs, I have St. Louis.
That's an interesting take on St. Louis.
But the reality is okay, last year, let's call it an off season.
Mm-hmm.
Goaltending, you want a better backup than Ville Husso for now, but he's still young and he still can improve. Defensively, they've got it. They have Falk, they have Krug, and then you have Parayko, you have Scandella, and guys that can shut you down. Forwards, they've improved. They're getting healthy Tarasenko, who may be on the bounce back. Whether or not he is, you bring in guys like Brandon Saad and Buchnevich. Those are major improvements. Ryan O'Reilly doesn't have to be their top scorer or a top scorer.
He can just focus on that elite defense.
Exactly, and have guys like Perron and their additions step up and score.
Yeah.
And again, if Tarasenko pulls up and wants to put in 40 goals, 30 goals even, I think St. Louis is deadly. They're solid on every front. They're another team that lacks that just doesn't have any flaws.
True.
Outside of their backup goaltending position.
Very true.
And I think they're going to be a threat to go deep if their defense can click alongside their additions. Tampa Bay, this is obviously low than you would want
back-to-back cup winners.
But the reason why I have them low isn't even the losses this offseason. I think they're going to eat that and have another deep playoff run. I just have them low because they don't need to work hard in the regular season.
No, these are just regular season rankings.
Yeah.
Postseason is a different can of worms here. So.
Tampa Bay is a postseason team. They can be a regular season team, but they know better than that. They know they just need to be good enough. I'm not saying they're going to be lazy in the regular season, but their focus is playoffs. They are a confident team and know that they'll give their efforts and they'll grow and develop, try the new options they have to fill out their losses in Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, and David Savard. They'll try some options to make those replacements, but they're looking towards playoffs. That's the only reason I have them lower, because they don't need to be a strong regular season team.
No.
Toronto, who's been a strong regular season team, I think it's time for them to go deep in the playoffs, but we'll talk about that in the next video. They had, I think, a good offseason. Yes, there's some losses, but they have a lot of forward options. You look at the guys they brought in, like Nick Ritchie, along with guys like Michael Bunting stepping up.
Brought in Andre Kasha,
who can at times be a top six forward. They have options throughout their depth chart on forward. Defense, I think, is actually stable as they're running it back, and I think they should.
They should.
Goaltending, it's not questionable because Peter Mrazek's good. Jack Campbell last year was good. but it's just not a surefire tandem that's going to get you wins, because this is the first time Jack Campbell's coming off such a dominant season.
Yeah.
And Peter Mrazek wasn't as strong as he's been in years past. So it can work, but I'm not for sure saying that it will. But they have options. They have talent. I think it's just a matter of things clicking and them coming in with some confidence and some intensity throughout the entire season for them to be a deadly team.
And man, isn't that just the motto for the Leafs? It can work, but will it?
Yeah. So that's why I don't have them much higher, as I think they're going to be among the elite teams, but I don't think they'll be on top of the elite teams. Winnipeg is another team I have improving. Defense. They've been great everywhere except defense since losing Trouba and Bufflin.
And they bring in Schmidt and Dillon.
And I think that's great to build around guys like Neil Pionk, who's been a great top four defenseman, and Josh Morrissey, who's been their guy.
Yep.
Now they have options for offense. They have options for defense. Their forward group's still nasty. Mason Appleton is a loss, but I think last year they were the deepest forward group.
Right.
I think it's a loss they can handle this season.
Yep.
I think as of now, they may be the most perfect team outside of their backup goalie position, where they have Eric Comrie. But at starter, I had him at 3. You had him at 2 in terms of goalies. Connor Hellebuck is going to put up a Vezina season you would expect, especially with the defense they've brought in.
100%.
You can play him 70 games and still probably go deep in the playoffs, because there isn't that pressure with guys supporting him as he plays games. Above them, I have major improvement from Florida.
It looks like improvement will happen on what was a phenomenal season for them last year.
Their only loss is Chris Striger, but Spencer Knight was their starter in the play, or at least their best goalie in the playoffs. They didn't have a definitive starter in the playoffs, but Spencer Knight looked to be that guy. Sergei Bobrovsky, who they're paying $11 million, I mean...
Is he worth $11 million? No, but is he worth keeping on your roster? Yes.
For this season, if you can afford him, yeah, I think that's going to be a great tandem. And then, I mean, you bring in Sam Reinhart. He's their third option now, going from a place in Buffalo where he actually thrived as the first option.
Right.
There's really no pressure for Reinhart to play out of his mind, but he can. And he can make the guys around him better, or he can do it himself.
Yeah, for sure.
He's got a great playmaking game, a great two-way game that really fits as the second slot behind Barkov. Mm-hmm. Maybe you put him beside Barkov. That would be deadly to have two-way forwards that shut you down on both ends, like Brad Marchand and Patrice Bergeron. Imagine that in Florida. This team gave Tampa Bay trouble without Aaron Ekblad. You bring back Aaron Ekblad. You bring in Sam Reinhart. I originally had them first, but I didn't want to hype them too much yet. But I think it's maybe going to only rise in Florida, as they could be the best team in Florida, with Tampa Bay obviously focusing more on playoffs this season.
Right.
You can't sleep on Colorado. Colorado has a couple big losses in Brandon Saad and Jonas Donskoy, but you got to keep the respect on their name. Grubauer is also another huge loss, third in Vezina voting. You bring in Kemper, who at times has been an elite Vezina level goalie in Arizona. Sure. I'm not sure what it's looking like because he's been unhealthy. I think goaltending, they're obviously not as strong as they've been, but the benefit is they have Pavel Francouz coming back. So as a tandem, it's an improvement, but their starting position is weakened. Defense, they're still running it back, and this team was the best defensive team last season, at least in the regular season. So you mix that with Nathan McKinnon and that big three, I think I don't think they're going to continue to dominate. Really, this is another team that's looking towards playoffs, but they're so talented. I don't see how they finish much lower than 3.
I think it's a cup or bust year for Colorado. I think it truly is a cup or bust year for them.
It's got to be, because at this point they've had every opportunity. They have to be the best team in hockey. This is as good as it gets for Colorado. Outside of losing Grubauer, Makar's coming to his own. McKinnon's at his peak. Rantanen and Landeskog, they're all in their prime. The only player you can expect more improvement out of is Bowen Byram, because he's so young and he hasn't played a full season. But this is, again, like you said, this is as good as it gets, and it's a cup or bust season for Colorado. I think they have to do it, and I think they will do it, or at least they'll remain among the elite. But above them, I have Carolina, who's been one of the most stable teams in the NHL. Despite losing Hamilton, I think they've replaced him well in numbers. You bring in Ethan Bear, who has his defensive lapse for here and there, but he's still good offensively to replace what Hamilton does in some capacity. But then you have Tony DeAngelo, who is obviously controversial, but he can play. He can be an elite offensive defenseman, and throughout the preseason, he hasn't been looking too bad. I think he's learned to quiet it down and be a team player. So if he can maintain that, that's another option that may be able to exceed the offensive numbers that Hamilton was putting up.
Right.
But you still have Slavin, you still have Pesci. I think they're going to be solid throughout. The only thing they really bungled was goaltending this offseason. You have Ned, you have Mrazek, you have Reimer. They lose them all, and they bring in Anderson and Ranta, which is high risk, high reward. Both of these goalies have been among the elite, but they've also been very injury prone, and they look to be in declines.
Right.
So which versions of them are we going to get? I don't know, and we'll see. But that's really the only question in Carolina, for now at least. Number 1, the Vegas Golden Knights. I think they're built for the playoffs. They're built for the regular season. There's really no flaw to this team. Yes, they lose Marc-Andre Fleury, but they bring in Laurent Brossoit, who was a great backup for Hellebuck in Winnipeg, putting up solid numbers as a backup. You have him behind Leonard. I think this team is perfect outside of the fact they don't have a number 1 center.
Right.
They're deep on the wings. They're deep on forward. That's really the only flaw in this squad, but I think they're going to be competitive, and I think they're going to dominate because they have options, they have stability, and they have talent.
Right.
All right, so now let's move on to how things look in the divisions. Rounding out the Metro, I have Columbus, Pittsburgh at 7, the Devils at 6, the Rangers at 5, and although those 3 teams are out, I think they can push in if, let's say, Washington declines, Philadelphia doesn't click. But then I have the Islanders at 4, again, Philadelphia at 3, Washington at 2, and Carolina with a dominant season. I have them at 1.
Right.
The Atlantic, Buffalo, Detroit, they're kind of out of the mix. Then you have Ottawa, Montreal, Boston, who I think Ottawa and Montreal can do some damage, and they'll be pushing teams like Boston. Maybe if Florida and Toronto have bad seasons, they can get knocked out. Anyways, I have Boston at 4, Tampa at 3, Toronto at 2, and Florida, who I think is going to improve. I think they'll be at 1. In the Central, Arizona, I don't think has a shot. I think they're going to be one of the worst, if not the worst teams in the NHL, but above them, you have Nashville. They're always going to be in the mix despite the moves. I think with the moves, they're going to be lower, but again, you can't count them out. Minnesota is coming off a playoff season. They've mostly improved since, you would think, so they'll be in the mix, but I have Chicago getting that first wildcard spot, then Dallas, St. Louis, Winnipeg, and Colorado. Then we have the Pacific, Anaheim, San Jose. I don't think there's a shot there, but the Pacific's wide open. Teams like LA, Calgary, and Seattle are going to be pushing. For now, I have Vancouver at that 3rd spot, but I think it's wide open to any of those teams. And if Edmonton, for some whatever reason, collapses, let's say defense gets hurt, banged up, Larson's not there, goaltending's old, so it is possible they miss.
Yep.
And then you may have 2 spots in the Pacific Open. Vegas is going to lock it down, though. No competition for them, really.
With that, that'll do it for part 1 of our NHL season preview. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, give it a like down below. Subscribe so you don't miss any of our other uploads. Comment down below what you think of our power rankings. Who you think we have too low, who you think we have too high, let us know in the comments. Make sure to watch out for part 2. Again, subscribe so you don't miss that. And we'll see you in our next video. Peace.